This video is about attacking fortified positions, and this is an attack on a fortified position. I still managed to get over 7 to 1, lose about 1,000 men. I think it is possible to attack this position and get 2 to 1 or even 1 to 1. It's probably possible to get your entire army destroyed. So I want to give you some basic principles on how to attack a fortified position. I think the single most important thing is you have to use all of the things in your army combined if you're going to attack a fortified position and hit it with overwhelming power. The reason is if you attack, let's say there's an enemy in a fortified location and you just run an infantry unit in there and melee. If you lose the melee, there's a really good chance your officer is going to be wounded or killed. And your unit's going to take a bunch of losses. And when your unit routes, and it will rout, the morale and condition of your unit will go to 0. So that unit's going to be out of the battle for a while, probably 20 minutes in game. So it's a disaster for your army. Losing officers is a disaster. Losing a bunch of men for no purpose is a disaster. And then having your unit out of the battle for 20 minutes is also very bad. I'm going to attack this position and just crush it. I'm going to lose no officers in the battle. In fact, 3 of my officers are going to get promoted, get their 3rd star. So the first thing I want to do is I want to decide how to approach the objective. And I'm not even, as you see here, I've been to this map before. I know not to attack to the position that's just to the right. And you can attack across this little ford and then attack the enemy position immediately. The downside of that is you'll be attacking uphill into a fortified position supported by artillery. If you attack uphill, your units are going to move really slow, be exhausted when they get there, and they're going to lose the melee. So you're going to take casualties all during the attack, and then you're going to take casualties during the melee. And because your units will be tired, well, they'll actually be pretty exhausted probably, they have no chance of winning the melee, and they'll be defeated, the officers will be dead, and your units will have to rest for 20 minutes. So, and then bonus, as your units retreat, they'll take flanking fire, which just means more casualties. So the units that I have coming in on the right side, I have no artillery over there because I can't supply them, and artillery blows through their supply very quickly. So their job is to distract the enemy and to take part in the attack on the right side of the map, which is mostly cav, and then join in the attack on the fortified position where the victory location is, when my main force gets there. But they're not to engage separately. So what I want to do is I want to attack the enemy with the combined weight of my entire army when the time comes. And I don't want to attack piecemeal. Instead, I want to attack the enemy army when it's divided piecemeal. And that's called defeat in detail. So what I want to do is I want to isolate small groups of the enemy force and destroy them with the entire weight of my army, and destroy them one group at a time. So the first group I want to destroy these skirmishers. And these skirmishers have no chance against this huge force that I have here, and I want to concentrate as many units as I can now that I see where they are, and make sure I kill these guys. Then I'm going to advance to the north, and there's a fortification on the other side of a river. But I don't want to attack across that river into that fortification because you get 0 cover when you're in water. So I want to roll up my artillery and degrade that unit, and then actually I want it to retreat without having to fight it, without having to charge and fight in melee at all. And that would be the ideal. But if I do want to attack across, I'm going to show you how to do that, and I set that up. And I use detached skirmishers to reduce my losses in that engagement. And detached skirmishers are really good for keeping your losses down and keeping your core units in high condition and morale. So anytime an enemy unit is taking morale damage, the officer will run to that location to buff them. Because the officer, the corps commander, gives them a huge buff to morale recovery. This is really important for you too. Keeping your officers alive and killing his officers is one of the most important things you can do. I think Spectrum mentions this in almost every video, how important it is to kill the enemy commanders. And right now, I was fortunate enough to kill the enemy commander, and that is a huge, huge, devastating blow to his army. What that means is, as I degrade the enemy units, they won't be able to recover. And so even though there might be a 3-star unit, if the morale and condition goes to 0, that 3-star unit is not even able to defend itself. It's going to fight about as well as a raw recruit unit, a unit of raw recruits with an efficiency of about 10. So the whole effort is to degrade these enemy units, exhaust them, lower their morale. And now that their officer is dead, morale is going to be a real problem for them. So keeping that in mind, I've now moved up my infantry. There's a fortified position. I don't want to go into the water. And this is, like just keeping with the principles. I'm going to detach skirmishers to degrade the enemy, roll up my artillery. If I had sniper units, this would be a perfect opportunity for them. By the way, the only reason I don't have sniper units are terrific. And the only reason I don't have them is I'm using the big army strategy. I just don't need them. But they're great. I mean, if you want to fiddle with them, they're great. When I play on hard difficulty, I always use snipers. But this would be a perfect opportunity for skirmishers, snipers, sharps. It would be absolutely perfect. But I don't have any of those. But detached skirmishers will work very well. And but anyway, roll up the artillery, roll up the officer to give a constant buff to morale. And you can see that on the morale bar. You see an up arrow. And keep that morale high. Let my units rest after moving through the woods. It's all good. Everything that's happening is to my advantage right now. And what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start creeping my units and my artillery up closer and closer. I've become a big believer on hard difficulty, and particularly when I play the South, I always put the second artillery perk into that stealth perk that gives you a stealth cover bonus, particularly if you play the South, because the North has really good rifled guns. But on hard difficulty as the Union, I also play that perk. It's a very good perk. I think I'm going to start playing it on normal difficulty too. On normal difficulty, I don't seem to take... I take almost no losses in artillery. But in this case, the perk would be good because I want to creep up my artillery within canister range of the enemy and really degrade their morale. And I'm planning on an assault across this water, but I want my detached skirmishers to lead because they'll take much fewer casualties. And behind them, my regular infantry will be able to run and get within melee range of this enemy. But I'm just taking my time. I'm taking my time, creeping forward with infantry and artillery, getting ready to rush this guy. But because his officer is dead, he's just losing morale each second, and eventually he breaks. So I don't even have to fight him in melee combat to break him. Yep, and there he goes. So I was planning on a melee attack, but it wasn't even necessary. I'm looking at this. My officer's in the wrong place. For the attack, I would have wanted the officer... Actually, the entire time, I should have had my officer up there. That was a mistake. But fortunately, I get it right in the big attack. So, yeah. Now I need to rush across the water. because, again, zero cover when you're in that water, so get out of there as fast as possible. Lead with detached skirmishers to reduce your losses and keep your units whole. And yeah, I'm looking at my units, and apparently they're within range of the officer because I see the up arrow for morale. So yeah, put them on run, get across the water, hit these guys. Now he moves back, he recovers enough morale to try to take the fortification back, but because his morale was so low, he just barely had enough to, not be in rout mode. And so he took very little damage and routed again. So that's devastating for that unit. And as he falls back, he takes volleys of fire, and he just piles up the losses, which degrades his unit. So don't be that guy. That is not what you want to do. So basically, it comes down to make sure your units don't rout and make sure the enemy units do. I mean, it sounds simple, but do everything you can to make sure your units don't rout. If they get tired, and you can, have them fall back and recover condition, have them fall back and have the officer close by, have them recover morale so that they never rout. And I think in the whole series, you just don't see my units rout very often. And that's one of the reasons why. Is if you maintain morale and condition, they'll stand there and fight. While morale is very important, I also never put any unit perks or command perks in anything that buffs morale. And the reason is I don't think it's anywhere near as important as stamina. Stamina is so crucially important to how your units function. And morale can just be maintained by keeping your units supported by the commander and resting them when you need to. So here I'm moving up infantry, I'm moving up my artillery. The artillery is going to fire a few blasts into this unit in front of it and push them off. And yeah, this is only going to end one way. So there's an artillery. The best way to approach artillery is, again, detached skirmisher. So get them to limber up and then attack them with infantry. That guy just shattered. Perfect. Yep, so this is open ground, so I'm throwing forward a detached skirmisher. He's going to take shots from the artillery. Here's another detached skirmisher. These skirmishers, even though they're hit with canister, will take far fewer casualties than a regular infantry unit. Now, my units on the diversionary attack can start to push back these cav units. I expect there to be a battle in the wooded area. Turns out, not much of one. The AI figures that's not a fight it can win, so it pretty much gives up the woods. And I'm going to push the cav back. So now his position is pretty bad. But again, the idea is I can destroy the enemy in detail. So before I attack the fortification, I want to get the rest of the map squared away. And the way I do that, the way I get the rest of the map occupied and controlled, is I make sure that the enemy is pushed into a corner and out of the battle. And then I can turn all of my attention of my army onto the fortification. So this is all open ground, and this is not a good place to be, but it's all open ground up in the northern flank. This is better than approaching from the south, but it's still open terrain. So what I want to do here is I want to drive the enemy off. I want to drive these skirmishers off. He's making good use of skirmishers, but I want to stay away from his infantry fire from the fort, and I also want to stay away from canister range from his artillery. So I'm figuring he has fairly low-grade artillery, which means that at range it's not going to do very much damage, so it's all good for me. I want to destroy these cav units that got themselves trapped on this side of the bridge. I don't really have to go to the other side of the bridge. There are only 2 crossing points, and I've secured those. But if I detach 2 units, I can go over there and pick up a bunch of easy kills, which means a bunch of free weapons. And a supply wagon, which is nice too. So this side of the river is secured. Nice supply wagon, very nice. If you don't want to fire into supply wagons, turn off the ability of your units to shoot, and they will not fire. If you don't turn that function off, they'll fire into the supply wagons and destroy them. I think Spectrum also mentioned that destroying supply wagons that you're not going to capture is also a good tactic. So, but that was a supply wagon I could capture. Yeah, I have 2 infantry that are going to walk up and just pile up a bunch of free kills and get me a bunch of free weapons, and that's all good. And the rest of the army is big enough to destroy the fortifications. I don't have to wait for those guys to finish cleaning up. I'm looking at the condition and the morale of my units. One of the things is that I want to make sure condition is high because I want to sprint. I want the units to run in when the battle starts, and not just run in to win the melee, but also once I've broken into the fort, continue to be able to run. So I don't want them to just be able to get in there and be exhausted and they can't fight. So the first thing, move the commander up, move up the artillery. So I don't just rush in with the infantry. The infantry moved kind of within range, and then I got to rest them a bit. Now I'm moving up the artillery and let the artillery fire a bit, particularly at the guy who's in the fortification itself. I can hit him from the rear. Want to move the cav up. Notice the cav is right there, because cav is really decisive in these melee fights. Detach skirmishers. Have the skirmishers go up and absorb all the fire from the enemy fort, and then behind the detached skirmishers, the infantry charges and throws volleys into the enemy, degrades them. Hopefully the enemy fired into the detached skirmishers. And to my surprise, this thing just collapses. Once I break one part of the fort, all the other walls of the fort are being hit from the flank and rear, so they're going to fall right away. But I expected this to actually be a melee, and what I wanted was one unit to charge. And when that one unit charged, the other units would fire into the melee, which you can do, and not do friendly fire. The artillery would fire into the melee, and then have the cav charge. The cav can be really decisive in winning the fight. So if you have skirmishers, bonus, snipers, bonus, but artillery, getting that artillery up close to fire canister is crucial, and getting that cav up is also a huge help. Now, once the attack starts, I can have the supporting troops that have been waiting patiently for this moment to charge in and hit the enemy from the flank. And that's all good, because the enemy turns to face this main attack, and when they do, they expose their flanks. And that whole group in the woods, instead of having to fight through the woods, those units are going to collapse almost instantly because they're going to be flanked. So, yeah, anytime, just collapsing the enemy position and having them instantly routed is better than having to grind your way through a tough wooded position. And they're not going to last. They're going to last seconds. So a lot of the enemy has routed. My infantry's on top of them. Not one unit has broken. Their morale and condition is very good. Not one of my units have broken. Their morale and condition looks very good, and I can continue on the attack. Now I have the high ground, and he has the low ground. He's in this awful terrain. I'm firing downhill. His position is now completely hopeless. If the retreat mechanics worked realistically in this game, I would be able to secure the only crossing on the right side, and all the troops that were trying to surrender that direction would be captured. Unfortunately, the retreat and route mechanics do not work, have never worked. The retreat direction doesn't work. Units in route don't behave properly. That's never going to be fixed. The devs don't seem to understand that this is completely wrong, and they're not going to fix it because I don't think they recognize how bad it is. But this is completely wrong. These units should not fight their way back across the fort. They're completely routed. They should completely surrender and not be able to fight to the death. Units in the Civil War did not do that. So anyway, this battle's over, and it's a complete victory, over 7-1. If I'd been able to just block the crossing on the right side, which I should have been able to do if the mechanics worked properly, I would have. I had plenty of time to do it. But really, if I put my cav unit there, it would have gotten wiped out, which is wrong. I should have been able to put a cav unit there. The position is blocked. All the units trying to escape that way would surrender. I would have easily had over 10,000, 10-1 victory. So anyway, that's it. That's a very simple explanation. I'm going to show a more detailed attack when I attack Washington, the fortifications at Washington. I actually attack with 5 or 6 melee cav units at a single point. Well, it's 2 rows of infantry, like 5 or 6 melee units, melee cav. The enemy fortification breaks. I suffer almost no losses. The enemy is destroyed. My cav goes into the enemy rear, immediately scarfs up about 3 artillery units. My infantry races through and puts flanking and rear fire on all nearby infantry units. They immediately break, and I annihilate them. And it's over, like, instantly. But the preparation, there are my 3 stars. The preparation for the battle is exactly the same. Detached skirmishers roll up the infantry, roll up the artillery, and I roll up a lot of artillery in Washington, and then attack, with a combined force that crushes the enemy at a single point. So, hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helps you in your game. See you next video. Thanks.